The sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything else. It echoed in my ears, louder than the clink of wine glasses and the soft murmur of the sophisticated crowd that surrounded me. I stood in the bathroom of one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, staring at the wreckage of my life reflected in the mirror. My engagement had ended, not in the privacy of my home or in the comfort of my own heart, but under the scrutiny of a room full of high society diners. And it was Liam who had made the final decision for both of us. His words rang in my mind, final, sharp, and cold. Impossible. In front of an audience of influential businessmen and socialites, the diamond meant to symbolize our shared future now glimmered in its velvet box, mocking me. The elegant ring, once the pinnacle of our love story, now sat like a betrayal on the white tablecloth, spotlighted by the soft flicker of candlelight. Liam's face, once warm and familiar, was now a mask of detached politeness, though I caught the subtle gleam of relief in his eyes, the relief of freedom. His mother, Regina, stood behind him, her icy eyes cutting through me with a glance sharp enough to freeze the air around us. The weight of her gaze was almost more unbearable than Liam's indifference. My parents, sitting beside her, were as frozen as I felt inside. Their hopes for a marriage that would align with their ambitions shattered along with my heart. The burning humiliation scorched my skin. My legs threatened to give way beneath me as the reality of what had just happened sank deeper into my bones. My breath caught. But I couldn't afford the luxury of tears, not in front of all these people. I stood and pushed my chair back with a squeak that cut through the silence, drawing every eye in the room. I couldn't breathe in this suffocating space, surrounded by pity, judgment, and whispered gossip. I had to leave. I had to get away from them, from this life, from everything. Kindly, tell us where you're tuning in from. And kindly subscribe. I staggered towards the restroom, my mind a blur of disbelief and pain. Inside, I locked myself in a stall, the sound of my heart thudding in my chest louder than the quiet hum of the restaurant outside. It was there, in that small, cold sanctuary, that I broke. I crumpled onto the floor, clutching my knees to my chest, letting the weight of the world crush me. My engagement, my future, had been obliterated in front of everyone I had ever known. The tears came then, fierce and uncontrollable, running down my face like the loss I couldn't stop. A faint shuffle from the stall next to me broke through the fog of my despair. A soft cough, followed by the rustling sound of something being slid under the stall partition. My breath hitched. I leaned forward, eyes red and swollen, to see what it was. A folded piece of white paper, thick and heavy, slid to a stop just under the door. Confusion and curiosity pulled me from my devastation. Who would dare? I hesitated but then reached for the note, feeling the sharp edges of something dangerous within the simple act. I unfolded it with trembling hands, the weight of the paper feeling all too heavy in my grasp. The note was short, its words scrawled in dark, bold ink. Let me show you how a real man treats a woman. I couldn't breathe. Anger surged through me, a flash of indignation rising from deep within. Who did this stranger think he was? What audacity to observe my raw, exposed grief and offer such an arrogant declaration. But there, in the pit of my stomach, a strange curiosity twisted, a forbidden spark that was far more intoxicating than the anger. Was this a joke? A challenge? A sign? Everything in me screamed to crumple the note, to leave it behind and forget it. But my fingers curled around the paper instead, clutching it like a dangerous secret. This man didn't know me. He didn't know what I needed. Or did he? I stood slowly, wiping my eyes and splashing cold water on my face, trying to gather some semblance of composure. The note remained in my hand, a dangerous thing that pulsed with potential. When I stepped out of the stall, I barely noticed my reflection in the mirror. I looked like someone else, someone broken. But as my gaze met my own eyes, there was something there I hadn't seen before. A flicker of defiance, a small, wild spark in the depths of the pain. I turned to leave, but the door to the bathroom swung open, and in walked Liam and his mother. They both stood at the threshold, their presence as commanding as ever. "Liam," I said, voice shaking but stronger than I felt. I don't want to talk to you right now. But before I could escape, Regina stepped forward with the kind of icy smile that made my blood run cold. "Maya, darling," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "You're making a scene. People are talking." Liam didn't even look at me, his voice dismissive. "We need to discuss this. You've humiliated us." My jaw tightened as rage bubbled beneath my skin. Humiliated? You ended a 10-year engagement in front of half the city and you're talking about humiliation? Regina's eyes narrowed, her voice like a whip. "Your behavior is going to hurt our standing." I could feel my pulse racing, the anger growing with each word. I was no longer the naive girl who would cower in front of them. I was a woman in control of her own future. But before I could retort, a voice cut through the tension. Deep, resonant, and cool. "Is there a problem here?" I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, tall, commanding, with eyes that seemed to pierce straight through me. The world seemed to shift as his gaze locked on mine. Something about him was immediately arresting. Vincent Mercier. His name surfaced in my mind, and with it, the undeniable truth. I was no longer in control of my life. As I stood there, caught between the past I couldn't escape, and the unknown future that beckoned with the presence of Vincent Mercier, my life was no longer mine to dictate. This was the beginning of something I couldn't turn away from. But how had I gotten to this point? How had my broken engagement and the wreckage of my life led me to this strange, dark man? Let me take you back, to the beginning, when everything I thought I knew about love and power crumbled beneath my feet. The clink of my heels against the marble floor echoed through the bathroom as I stumbled toward the sink. My reflection in the mirror barely registered, just a blur of mascara-streaked eyes, a lipstick smudge, and a trembling face that barely resembled the woman who had just been publicly discarded by the man she thought she would marry. I reached out and grasped the cold porcelain, leaning forward as if it might anchor me to something stable in this sea of chaos. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, so much so that I had to force myself to steady them, the sharp tang of bitter tears still fresh on my tongue. The damage was done. The future I'd built up for years with Liam, with his perfect family, and their insidious political connections, was gone. Everything was collapsing in slow motion, and I had no choice but to watch it unravel. It wasn't just the loss of him, it was the loss of the life I thought I'd built, the life I had carefully crafted and curated like a delicate dessert, only for it to be destroyed in front of an audience of wealthy onlookers. But just as I was about to turn away from the mirror, to wipe away the remnants of my dignity and somehow piece myself together, the bathroom door swung open with a smooth, deliberate motion. I froze. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and commanding, his silhouette cutting through the dim lighting with the ease of someone used to being noticed. I couldn't even find my voice to protest, not that it would have mattered. He didn't look at me with curiosity or pity, like the others. No, his eyes were sharp, calculating, and even though he was still a few steps away from me, I could already feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. His presence was suffocating in the most intoxicating way. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, smooth, but carried a certain weight, like it belonged to someone who never asked a question unless they already knew the answer. There was no concern in it, no pity. It wasn't an offer of sympathy. It was an observation, a command almost, a quiet probe into my state of mind, as though he could see right through me. I swallowed, my throat dry, and took a step back, glancing around for the first time since he'd entered. He didn't belong here, in the restroom of this high-end restaurant. He was out of place, like a shadow that had slipped in unnoticed, silently assuming command of the space without anyone being aware of it. He was dressed impeccably, of course. His suit was dark, tailored to perfection, a sharp contrast against the soft, golden lighting of the room. The color of his eyes was hard to place at first, too deep to be entirely brown, but not light enough to be considered hazel. There was something piercing about them, something that made my insides tighten. He took another step forward, not in a threatening way, but with a calm, measured confidence that made everything feel out of balance. I straightened up, forcing myself to appear more composed. But the air was suddenly thick, heavy with the weight of his presence. I couldn't tell if it was the adrenaline from the events unfolding or the sheer intensity of his gaze, but something inside me felt alert, as if my body was responding to a danger I didn't yet fully understand. "You're far from home," he said softly, his voice like silk, laced with something darker, something more commanding. He hadn't moved any closer to me, but somehow it felt like he had crossed an invisible threshold. My pulse quickened. Or at least, far from where you expected to be. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The question lodged in my throat, and my instinct was to retreat, run, maybe. But I stayed frozen. There was something about him that made me want to do the opposite of what I usually would. His lips curled ever so slightly into a knowing smile, like he had anticipated this exact reaction from me. It unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. "You look like you've been through a storm," he said, his gaze flicking over me once more. "But storms pass, and when they do, there's often something worth salvaging in the wreckage." I didn't understand why I felt the need to answer him. I barely knew this man, yet his words had dug into my chest, creating a dull ache I hadn't felt before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore." The words slipped out before I could stop them. I'd never been one to expose my weaknesses to a stranger, especially a man who had come into the bathroom as if he already owned it. But there was something about him, something that made me want to unload, to confess everything and nothing at once. He studied me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said, his tone laced with authority. "In fact, you're in no condition to make any decisions, are you?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. It felt like everything in my life had been taken from me in a single heart-shattering moment. What was I supposed to do now? His eyes softened, just a fraction, but it was enough to make me feel exposed. Like he saw everything, the rawness I'd been trying to hide. "I can help," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I can take you away from this, away from all of it." I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion, the emotional wounds I was still reeling from, or just the undeniable magnetism of the man standing before me, but a part of me considered his offer. What did I have left to lose? He took a step closer, closing the distance between us with a smooth, effortless grace. I should have stepped back. I should have told him to leave, but I didn't. I was held captive by something I couldn't name. "You don't have to stay here and play the part anymore," he continued, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "You can leave your life behind. Let me protect you. Let me show you what it means to be treated the way you deserve." The offer hung in the air, and I couldn't bring myself to reject it, even though I knew deep down that there was more to this man than he was letting on. The lure of his promise, however dangerous, was undeniable. And in that moment, with my world in pieces, I found myself wondering if his offer was the escape I'd been searching for. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't know how to respond to him. How could I trust someone who'd appeared out of nowhere in the wake of my broken life? Vincent must have seen the confusion and hesitation in my eyes, because he reached into his pocket and slid something into my hand. A simple, heavy business card, its black edges gleaming under the bathroom lights. "I'll be waiting," he said simply, his gaze never leaving mine. The words were a promise and a challenge. I felt a spark of fear, yes, but also something else, something darker and more thrilling. A part of me wanted to step into the unknown, to walk away from everything I'd known and start over. But was it really a choice? As I glanced down at the card, my hand still shaking from the encounter, I knew one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. And whether I liked it or not, I was already on the path Vincent had set for me. I hadn't planned on seeing him again. Not like this. The moment Vincent's note had slid under the bathroom stall, I had imagined a world of consequences. A world where his proposition was nothing more than a fleeting, dangerous temptation. I told myself it was just a distraction, a momentary lapse in judgment. But as I stood in front of my reflection, the remnants of the dinner still a heavy weight in my chest, I realized that temptation had taken root deep inside me. The truth was undeniable. I was curious. The allure of his power, his presence, and the mysterious offer that still burned in my palm was too strong to ignore. It had been hours since our encounter, and the hum of the restaurant's aftermath still echoed in my mind. But somehow, everything felt quieter now. The life I had so meticulously crafted was slipping through my fingers like sand. I had just been discarded by Liam, my fiancé, in front of an audience that had eagerly witnessed the dismantling of my future. Nothing in my life made sense anymore. And that's when I made my decision. I was going to see Vincent again. It wasn't long before I found myself stepping out of the car, the city lights flickering behind me like a distant memory. I was being taken into his world now, away from the broken remnants of the life I once knew. The mansion stood in front of me, a towering monument to power and wealth. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, a place that spoke of untold influence and secrets. The gates were tall and imposing, forged from iron and stone, and as they creaked open to allow us inside, a chill of apprehension crawled down my spine. The air seemed different here, heavier, thicker, as if the very atmosphere was infused with something darker, more dangerous. As we drove deeper into the estate, I couldn't help but glance out the window, taking in the manicured grounds, the sprawling gardens, and the towering trees that lined the driveway. Every inch of this place screamed opulence, control, and something more, a sense of dominance that I hadn't yet begun to understand. The car came to a stop in front of the mansion, and the door opened before I could even reach for the handle. A man in a dark suit, one of Vincent's men, stood at attention, his expression unreadable. He held out his hand, a silent invitation, and I took it, allowing him to guide me into the grand hall of the mansion. The entrance was just as imposing as the exterior. Marble floors stretched out in every direction, gleaming under the soft lighting, while intricate tapestries and paintings adorned the walls. The entire place exuded wealth and history. There was an undeniable sense of power here, and I felt small in its presence, exposed in a way I couldn't explain. Vincent's voice broke through the silence, smooth and commanding, as he appeared from the shadows. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his eyes, the same piercing shade of whiskey, locked onto mine with a familiarity that made my heart race despite the chill that ran through me. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice laced with that same confidence that had taken control of me earlier. I swallowed, trying to steady myself, but my pulse was still thundering in my ears. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted, my words coming out shakier than I intended. He stepped closer, the distance between us growing shorter, and I could feel the heat of his presence. "You're here now," he said, his lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And you'll see why you don't need to be afraid of anything anymore. You don't need to hide anymore." His words sank into me, finding a place in my heart where the broken remnants of my past still lingered. He was offering something I didn't know I needed: control, safety, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to start over. But what was the cost? Vincent led me through the mansion, guiding me past rooms filled with lavish furniture and modern art, each one seemingly more extravagant than the last. He was quiet as we moved, but there was a certain weight to his silence. It wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, like he was allowing me to absorb everything around me. Finally, we arrived at a large, open room, more of a grand hall than anything else. A long dining table stretched in front of us, adorned with expensive glassware and crystal chandeliers hanging above. I could already sense the tension in the air, the hum of voices speaking in hushed tones from the other side of the room. I knew instantly this wasn't a normal gathering. "Welcome to my world," Vincent said, turning to face me. It was then that I realized how deep I had stepped into his realm, how much I had already surrendered by simply agreeing to enter this place. The walls here didn't just speak of luxury. They whispered of power, of influence, and of control. This was his kingdom, and I was just another pawn, though I hadn't yet decided if I would choose to be that. Vincent noticed my hesitation and gave a small, knowing smile. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice almost affectionate. "You think you're out of your depth, that this is too much." I didn't say anything, but my eyes betrayed me. I felt out of place, unsure, like a child wandering into a room full of adults who already knew the game. His eyes softened, and he took a step closer. "It's all right," he said. "You'll get used to it." He took my hand then, and for a moment, I was caught between the urge to pull away and the pull of his magnetic presence. Something in me wanted to resist, wanted to fight against whatever pull he had over me. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered only hours ago, ached for something else. Something new. "You're not like the others," Vincent said, his fingers gently squeezing my hand. "You don't fit in their world. You never did. But in mine, you're exactly where you belong." I didn't understand what he meant by that, but as I stood there, in the heart of his world, I realized something important. I was already too far gone to turn back now. The tension between us grew as Vincent continued to show me more of his world. He didn't just want me here as an observer. He wanted me to see, to understand, and most importantly, to accept. He showed me his loyal followers, the men and women who bowed to him with respect that bordered on fear. Each interaction was a lesson in control, in dominance, in power. I was drawn to it, despite myself. There was something intoxicating about the way Vincent held the room with just a glance, the way his presence commanded attention without a single word spoken. He was a man who ruled with an iron fist, but he did it with such elegance, such poise, that it almost felt like an art form. And I realized, as I watched him command the attention of his world, that this was something I had never experienced before. Real power, unchallenged and absolute. But there was more to it than that. The way he spoke to me, the way he guided me through his world, it was more than just control. There was something beneath it, a connection that I couldn't explain. Something in his eyes, something in his touch, told me that he saw more than just a woman lost in the wake of her broken engagement. He saw something else in me, something he was willing to claim. As the night wore on, my confusion deepened, but so did my fascination. With every step I took deeper into his world, I felt a pull, a dark, alluring force that promised to fill the void that had been left inside me. The more I learned, the more I realized that Vincent's world wasn't just about luxury and control. It was about belonging to something greater than yourself, something powerful and unyielding. And as we stood there, in the midst of his domain, I knew one thing for sure. My life had already been irrevocably changed. I was already a part of his world, whether I liked it or not. But the question remained, was I ready to accept it? The night ended with Vincent offering me a choice. "You can stay here," he said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something darker. "You can remain in the comfort of your old life, or you can take a step forward. Join me. Become a part of this world." I didn't know what the future held, but as I looked into his eyes, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again, and for the first time I wasn't sure if I cared. The mansion was quiet at night, the kind of silence that felt suffocating, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter it. I had spent days under Vincent's watch, every moment drawing me further into his world, his grand, unyielding world. At first it had felt like an adventure, like something I could throw myself into to escape the wreckage of my life. But now, as I moved through the silent corridors of the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking just out of sight. Vincent had told me I was safe here, that his protection was absolute. He had even shown me the grand things: luxury, power, security, things I had never even dreamed of before. He had invited me into his world of wealth, a world that pulsed with authority, control, and dominance. But safety, I was beginning to realize, came at a price. "Are you planning to just stare out the window all night?" Vincent's voice interrupted my thoughts, breaking the stillness of the room. I turned to face him, standing tall and imposing at the entrance to my suite, a dark figure in the soft moonlight that streamed through the windows. His black suit, sharply tailored, added to the commanding presence he exuded. He was a man who had made the world bend to his will, and I had become just another part of his carefully controlled universe. "I've been thinking," I replied softly, my voice wavering as I tried to steady myself. The truth was, I hadn't been thinking. I had been watching, observing, absorbing everything I could about this world and trying to make sense of it. Vincent's gaze softened, but it still carried an intensity that made my heart race. He took a step closer, his voice lower now, almost like a caress. "About what?" I don't know. About everything. I found it hard to explain. The life I had once known, quiet, predictable, safe, seemed so distant now. Vincent's world was intoxicating, but I wasn't sure if it was the kind of world I was meant to live in. He tilted his head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. You don't have to figure everything out, Amelia. I've got you. All of this power, is at your disposal now. You don't need to be afraid. The way he spoke, so sure, so confident, made it feel like everything would be fine if I just followed him, let him lead. But the closer I got to him, the more I saw, the more I felt the weight of the choices I had made. And I was beginning to wonder if the price for that protection was too high. The first time I truly saw the dark side of Vincent's world was an accident. I had been walking through the mansion, trying to get a feel for the estate. I wasn't used to feeling so isolated, so trapped in a bubble of luxury. But when I stepped into the hallway, I heard voices, loud, angry voices, and the unmistakable sound of fists hitting flesh. I had frozen. The voices were sharp, filled with menace, and there was no mistaking that this wasn't a simple argument. I moved toward the source, my feet almost moving on their own, drawn by the pull of something I couldn't explain. I found myself outside a closed door, the voices inside rising with anger. You think you can just steal from me? Vincent's voice came through the door, controlled but thick with something else. Something dangerous. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? The sound of a slap. A man's strangled cry. I couldn't see what was happening inside, but the images in my mind were enough. The realization hit me hard, like a cold gust of wind. Vincent's world wasn't just built on luxury and control. It was built on fear, on violence, and on making people submit to his will. I felt the need to pull back, to retreat into the safety of my suite. But I stayed, paralyzed by a combination of fear and curiosity. This was the man I had let into my life, the man who had promised to protect me, to offer me a future. But what kind of future was it, if it came with this kind of price? I didn't leave my room that night. I couldn't. The sounds of the men still rang in my ears, echoing through my mind as I lay in bed, staring up at the ornate ceiling above me. Vincent's face, his presence, was imprinted on my mind, the way he seemed to command everything around him. But now I couldn't ignore the darker side of that command. The violent streak that ran through his empire like a thread of poison. The next morning, Vincent came to me as if nothing had happened, as if the violence I had witnessed was just another part of his daily routine. You didn't sleep well last night, he observed, his voice a quiet murmur as he sat beside me on the edge of the bed, his gaze focused intently on me. I nodded, my throat tight. I heard something. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. You're part of my world now, Amelia. You'll see things you don't want to. But this is how things are done. This is the cost of protection. The words landed like a cold slap, the weight of them sinking deep into my chest. There was no escaping it now. I was part of his world, whether I liked it or not. And the more I became involved, the more I saw of the price I had to pay. Later that day, as Vincent's men went about their work, I found myself wandering the mansion again. This time, I didn't have to hide. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a part of it all. And as I walked through the rooms, the hallways, the gardens, I felt the strange pull of Vincent's world, the sense of power, of dominance, the influence he had stretched everywhere. But with each step, I could also feel the suffocating weight of it all, the sense that there was no way out, that every choice I made now belonged to him. Vincent didn't just control his empire, he controlled me. He was possessive, always near, always watching. The more time I spent with him, the more I felt it, his expectation, his constant need for reassurance that I was truly his. And it was intoxicating. His touch, his gaze, his voice. He had a way of making me feel like I belonged to him, like I was part of something larger than myself. But as the days wore on, I began to feel the cracks in the illusion. You belong to me now, Amelia, Vincent said one night, his fingers tracing the edge of my jaw as we sat in his study, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across his face. "I will keep you safe, but you have to trust me. You have to follow me." I felt the pull of his words, the weight of his promise. But at the same time, there was a nagging doubt at the back of my mind. What was I truly becoming by being with him? What kind of future was I building? A future built on fear and control? The question lingered in my mind, unanswered. As Vincent continued to pull me deeper into his world, I began to question whether I was still the same woman who had walked into his mansion that first night. My world had changed, my life had changed, and I wasn't sure if I could go back. But one thing was certain: Vincent had already claimed me, and the price of that protection was becoming clearer with every passing day. As the days stretched into weeks, I began to wonder, what was I willing to sacrifice to stay in his world, and was the price of my soul worth the safety he offered? In Vincent's empire, there were no easy answers, only consequences, and the haunting weight of what it meant to truly be his. The weight of Vincent's world felt suffocating, pressing against me with each passing day. His control was subtle, insidious. At first, it had been thrilling. The luxury, the power, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. I had fooled myself into thinking that I was in control of my own choices, that I was free to come and go as I pleased. But the longer I stayed, the more I began to see the truth. It had taken me weeks, maybe months, to finally piece it together. I had seen the way Vincent operated, the way his empire ran. His influence extended to every corner of the city, but it didn't stop there. His control over me, over every decision I made, had crept in so quietly that I hadn't realized how far I'd fallen until I was too deep to climb out. The realization hit me like a slap across the face. I had been manipulated from the start. I had always thought that I was the one making the decisions, that I was the one who had chosen to stay with Vincent. But when I started looking back, I saw the pattern. I saw the moments where he had nudged me just enough to make me believe I had control, when in reality, I had been a pawn in his game all along. The subtle ways he had pushed me toward this life, toward him, became clearer with each passing day. From the moment we met, he had been carefully orchestrating everything. My broken engagement, my sudden flight into his arms, the way he had taken over my thoughts and feelings. It wasn't love. It was manipulation. He had never given me a choice. The most painful part was realizing that I had allowed it. I had let him. It was late in the evening when I uncovered the truth, piecing it together in a rush of clarity. Vincent had sent me out on an errand, a simple task, something innocuous, but I had stumbled across something I shouldn't have seen. A ledger. A list of people and businesses, all marked with numbers and names that made my stomach churn. I didn't need to read the fine print to know what they meant. It was a record of his control, his dealings, his empire. But the most damning part was the entry under my name. Maya's attachment to Vincent, binding contract initiated. I dropped the paper, feeling a cold chill creep down my spine. I wasn't just a part of his world. I was part of his plan, his long-term strategy to secure his control over me. I had never been given a choice. I was trapped. The confrontation came later that night, when I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had spent the evening pacing, stewing over the lies and the realization that everything had been calculated. When Vincent finally entered the room, his usual confident smirk faltering as he saw the look on my face, I was ready. "What did you do, Vincent?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. I couldn't keep the betrayal out of my voice. "How could you manipulate me like this? You've been controlling everything. Everything I thought I was choosing was already decided for me. For God's sake, even my name is in your ledger." Vincent's face went still, his gaze narrowing as he assessed me, as if trying to gauge whether I was truly ready to hear the truth. "You don't understand, Amelia," he said quietly, his voice tinged with something unrecognizable. "I did what I had to do." My chest constricted with fury. "You didn't have to do anything. You played me. You played me from the very beginning." He took a step toward me, his presence filling the room. "I didn't play you. I made sure you were protected. I gave you everything you needed." I shook my head, stepping back from him. No, Vincent. You gave me nothing. You took everything from me and made me think it was my choice. I wasn't protected. I was controlled. There was a long pause, the air thick with tension. I could see his jaw clenching, his usually calm demeanor cracking under the pressure of my accusation. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of frustration. "You think I don't know how you feel?" he said softly. "You think I don't see the way you look at me, the way you feel trapped? You don't understand. I didn't give you a choice because I couldn't afford to. I couldn't let you go. I couldn't lose you. I need you here, by my side. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that happens." His words sent a shiver through me. It wasn't just about control. It was about his fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of being alone in his dark world. For the first time, I saw him not as the imposing kingpin, but as a man driven by his insecurities, his need for control, his need for me. But that didn't make it right. It didn't make his actions acceptable. "You think I want this?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. "You think I want to be part of this world? I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't ask for your protection, for your empire, for any of this. And now I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know who I've become." Vincent's expression softened just a little. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek. "I know I've pushed you, Amelia. I know I've controlled you, but it wasn't for me. It was for us. I was building something for us, a future for you and me, a future where you're safe, where no one can touch you." I pulled away from his touch, feeling a wave of frustration and sadness flood over me. "A future?" I repeated bitterly. "A future where I'm just a puppet in your game? Where I can't breathe without you pulling the strings? Where I have no say in anything?" Vincent flinched, his eyes darkening. "That's not what I want. That's not what I'm offering you. I'm offering you everything. Everything I have. All I'm asking for in return is your loyalty." "Loyalty?" I scoffed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You want me to be loyal to a man who controls everything about my life? Who doesn't even let me make my own decisions? I'm not loyal to you." "I'm loyal to the woman I used to be, the woman I was before you, before all of this." The words hung heavy in the air between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The truth was out there, raw and exposed. I couldn't deny it anymore. Vincent's grip on me was suffocating, and my own feelings for him, those conflicting, complicated emotions, were starting to feel like a burden I couldn't carry any longer. "You don't have to leave," Vincent said softly, his voice low and pleading. "Please, Amelia. I've already lost so much. I can't lose you too." I stood there, the weight of his words crashing over me. There was so much love in his voice, so much desperation. But there was also a quiet understanding that this was my breaking point, that he had pushed me to this moment, this decision, because of his own fears. "Maybe you're right," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Maybe I do belong with you, but not like this. Not when I'm losing myself. I can't be your pawn, Vincent. I need to be me again. I need to find myself outside of all of this." Vincent looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't read, something deep, something painful. And then, for the first time in all the time I had known him, he looked defeated. "I can't let you go," he said quietly. "But I'll give you the space you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make you stay." As he turned to leave the room, I felt something crack inside me. The man who had claimed me as his own, the man I had trusted, was broken too. And for the first time, I wondered if our lives, our fates, had been doomed from the start. The sound of the mixer's hum filled the room, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Flour dusted the countertop, a light snowfall of white against the worn wood, and the smell of fresh vanilla and melting butter wafted through the kitchen, a familiar comfort. For the first time in weeks, I found myself breathing deeply, my mind settling into the process of creation, away from the chaos of Vincent's world. Baking had always been my sanctuary. The one thing I could rely on, the one thing that had never been tainted by expectations or control. Each fold of batter, each carefully placed layer, was a return to something real, something mine. As I whisked the eggs and sugar, I allowed myself to forget about Vincent, about everything. The world outside of the kitchen seemed miles away, a distant echo to a life I no longer recognized. But as the sweetness of the vanilla filled the air, so too did the ache in my chest. I hadn't realized how badly I needed this small act of self-expression, until I had it again. For so long, I had sacrificed pieces of myself, believing that this life with Vincent was the only way to feel alive. But now, I saw the truth. I had never truly lived. A knock at the kitchen door startled me. I wiped my hands on the flour-covered apron and opened it to find Vincent standing in the hallway, his usual commanding presence softened by something I hadn't seen in him before. His dark suit was impeccable, as always, but today there was something different in his posture, a quiet acceptance, as if he wasn't here to control but simply to be. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said, his voice low, almost tender. "But I thought you might want some company." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. It had been a strange few days. Since our confrontation, I'd spent my time in the kitchen, working through my thoughts, trying to reclaim what I could of the life I had lost. "I'm fine," I said, my voice unsteady. "I just needed some time." Vincent nodded, his expression unreadable. "I understand. But I want you to know that I see you, Amelia. I see how hard you're fighting to keep who you are. And that's why I'm here. Not to control, not to make demands, but to offer you what you need." My heart twisted at his words. There was a vulnerability in him now, something raw and exposed, and I couldn't quite place it. Was this real? Or was it just another manipulation, another carefully crafted move in his game? "You can leave whenever you want," he continued, stepping into the kitchen. "You don't need my permission. You never did. But I know that part of you wants something more than freedom. You want a life where you don't have to choose between who you are and what I offer." I lowered my gaze, unsure of how to respond. My thoughts were tangled, my emotions in turmoil. Part of me still wanted to run, to escape this world he had built around me. But another part, the part I didn't want to admit, was starting to see the pull of his world. There was power here, security, a place where I wouldn't have to fight for survival. "I've never been good at letting go," Vincent said quietly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Not of people, not of control. But I realize now that I've been holding on too tightly. And that's not how love works. Not real love." I felt a lump form in my throat, the words too much to absorb all at once. Real love. Did he mean it? Did he even understand what love really was, or had he only ever used it as a tool to manipulate, to control? "You're right," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Love shouldn't feel like this. It shouldn't feel like being trapped." Vincent stepped closer, closing the gap between us. His presence was overwhelming, but this time, it felt different. There was no demand in his eyes, no expectation, just vulnerability. "I never wanted to trap you, Amelia," he said softly. "I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to be safe, to have everything you ever needed. But I see now that I didn't give you a choice. I'm sorry for that." The apology hung in the air, fragile and raw. It was the first time he had ever admitted any fault, the first time I had seen him not as a kingpin, but as a man, flawed and human. And in that moment, I realized something important. He was willing to change, but the question was I willing to stay? Was I willing to accept his love on his terms, not as a man trying to possess me, but as a partner, someone who saw me as his equal? For the first time in a long while, I let my guard down. "I don't know what to do anymore, Vincent," I said, my voice trembling. I'm scared of losing myself, but I'm also scared of losing you. He reached out, his hand brushing mine gently, as though he was afraid I would pull away. You won't lose yourself, Amelia. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking you to be who you are, yourself. I don't want to change you. I want to be a part of your world, not control it. His words, soft and steady, seemed to settle in the air between us, a promise, a lifeline. Could I believe him? Could I trust him after everything that had happened? I need to think, I said, finally pulling my hand back. I need to figure out what I really want. Vincent nodded, his gaze never leaving me. Take all the time you need. But know this, Amelia. I'm here. And I'll always be here. As the days passed, I found myself grappling with my own desires, with the pull of Vincent's world and the life I had left behind. The bakery, my family's legacy, still called to me, but the lure of Vincent's power, his world of luxury and control, was hard to ignore. I spent hours in the kitchen, pouring my soul into my baking. There was something cathartic about it, something grounding. It reminded me of who I was before all of this began, the woman who found peace in her craft, in the simple joy of creating something beautiful. It was my one true escape, the one place where I felt like I could breathe again. And yet, with each cake I iced, each perfect batch of pastries I pulled from the oven, I knew deep down that I could never go back to that life, not fully. Not when everything I had known had been turned upside down. Not when the world I now occupied had changed me, had opened my eyes to things I couldn't unsee. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen, my hands covered in flour, my thoughts swirling around my future, Vincent appeared again. His silhouette filled the doorway, his presence still commanding, but gentler now, more subdued. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low and earnest. Maybe you're right. Maybe freedom isn't about leaving. Maybe it's about finding balance. I turned toward him, unsure of what he meant. Balance? Yeah, he continued, stepping into the room. You're right. Love isn't about control, it's about respect. And you have to have space to grow, to be yourself. So I'm giving you that space. I'm not going to control what you do. You're free to choose, to make your own decisions. But know this, whatever you decide, I'll be by your side. The words, unexpected and sincere, left me speechless. For the first time, I felt like Vincent wasn't trying to own me, but was offering me something real, a partnership. I stared at him, trying to process everything he had just said. The weight of his words hung in the air between us, and for the first time, I felt something shifting inside me. A sense of hope, a sense of possibility. I don't know if I can fully trust you yet, I said softly. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give us a chance. Vincent smiled, a genuine, soft smile that reached his eyes. That's all I ask. And in that moment, I realized that perhaps, just maybe, there was a future for us. A future where I could still be me, and where we could build something together. Not on control, but on mutual respect. The cost of freedom wasn't about leaving it behind. It was about finding the courage to embrace something new, something unexpected, with him by my side. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could walk it. The silence of the night was broken only by the steady hum of the city's distant pulse. It was a strange feeling, being caught between two worlds, neither of which I truly belonged to. There was the one I had tried to hold on to, the family bakery, the legacy of my grandparents, the life I had spent years building with my own hands. And then there was Vincent's world, a world of power, danger, and shadows. A world where everything, including me, was part of a grand, complex game. Tonight, the weight of both worlds pressed down on me harder than ever. Vincent was pacing the floor of his office, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold as he reviewed the latest intel. Silas Vance, his old rival, had escalated his campaign against Vincent's empire, hitting at its heart. The pressure on us was mounting. On Vincent, on me, on everything I had ever known. I watched him from across the room, the flickering lights casting long shadows across his features. He was as calm as ever on the outside, but I could feel the tension radiating off him, a storm building beneath his composed exterior. "I've been expecting this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Vance is playing a dangerous game, but it's not just about power anymore. He's making it personal." I shifted uneasily on the edge of the couch. I had become accustomed to the power plays, the undercurrent of threats and manipulations, but this felt different. Vance wasn't just targeting Vincent. He was targeting me, my family, my bakery, everything I held dear. "He's cutting off my suppliers," Vincent continued, his voice hard, the calm facade masking the fury just beneath the surface. "He's turning the city against us. We've lost a lot of ground in just the past few days." "And my bakery," I spoke up, my voice quiet but steady. "My family's business. He's going after that too, isn't he?" Vincent's eyes flickered to mine. There was no denying it now. His war with Vance had reached into every corner of our lives, and I was right in the middle of it. "I didn't want this for you," he said, the vulnerability in his voice softening his usual steely tone. "I never wanted to drag you into this, Amelia. But the moment you chose to stay by my side, you became part of this war. And I'll protect you. I'll protect everything you care about." But as much as his words reassured me, they also filled me with doubt. His protection came at a price, one I had been willing to pay until now. But my bakery, my family's legacy, it wasn't something I could risk losing without a fight. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, covert operations, and covert threats. I stayed close to Vincent, never leaving his side as tensions between his empire and Silas Vance's grew more intense. Vance had always been ruthless, but now he was coming after me, attacking my family's bakery directly. The stress was starting to show on Vincent as well. I could see the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his jaw tightened when a phone call from one of his men came in, the flicker of anger in his eyes when something didn't go according to plan. But beneath it all, there was a sense of control. He thrived in chaos. I, on the other hand, was losing my grip. I had come to love the bakery, to see it not just as a business, but as a piece of my soul. It was the one thing in my life that had never been tainted by power struggles or manipulations. Now it felt like the ground was slipping from under me. One afternoon, I received a phone call from my father, his voice grave on the other end of the line. "Amelia, listen to me," he said, his tone clipped. "We've heard rumors that Vance is making moves on your bakery. He's trying to buy up all the nearby property, squeeze you out." My heart sank. "What do we do, Dad?" "Get out. Get away from Vincent. There's too much at stake. You're going to lose everything if you stay involved with him." The words hit like a punch to the gut. My father had always been protective, but now the fear in his voice was clear. He was telling me to abandon everything I had worked for, to walk away from Vincent, from the man I had come to care for. That night, Vincent came to me with the same determined intensity that he always had. But this time, his voice was different, softer, almost pleading. "Amelia, I need you to trust me. I'm not going to let him take anything from you. Not the bakery, not your family's legacy. I'll tear this city apart if I have to." I could feel the weight of his words. I knew that Vincent had the power to make that happen, to protect me, to ensure the survival of my family's business. But at what cost? "I don't want to be your pawn, Vincent," I said, my voice trembling despite my resolve. "I don't want to be part of this game anymore." Vincent's face hardened, the vulnerability from earlier vanishing in an instant. "I've never treated you like a pawn, Amelia. Everything I do for you, for us." "For us?" I repeated, feeling a surge of anger mixed with confusion. "Vincent, I don't know what that means anymore. I'm losing myself in all of this. I don't even know who I am without the bakery, without my family." He stepped closer, his eyes dark and intense. "I know you're scared, and I know you're confused. But you're not alone in this. You never were. You're mine, Amelia, and I'm not going to let you go." The possessiveness in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I had always been drawn to his power, his confidence. But now, it felt like something else, something darker, more dangerous. As the days passed, the pressure continued to build. I found myself caught between two impossible choices: betray Vincent to protect my family's bakery, or remain loyal to him and risk losing everything. Each option seemed to come with its own devastating consequences. Vincent's world was slowly consuming me, his demands, his expectations, his need for control. Yet, I couldn't deny the pull I still felt for him. There was something intoxicating about his power, his presence. He was everything I had never dared to want. Yet here I was, torn between what I needed and what I feared. One night, as I sat on the balcony of his mansion, staring out over the sprawling city, I felt Vincent's presence behind me. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "Amelia," he said quietly, his voice low and almost tender. "I know you're struggling, but this is the price of loyalty. If you stay with me, you're part of this world, and you'll never be able to leave it behind." I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. What if I don't want to be part of this world anymore? He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have a choice, Amelia. You're already too deep, and I'm not letting you go." The tension between us grew, the air thick with unspoken words and half-formed thoughts. The more I tried to distance myself from Vincent, the more I found myself drawn back into his world. The stakes were higher than ever, and with each passing day, I found myself wondering if I could survive the cost of loyalty. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about choice, and the choice was mine. The night of the final confrontation came quickly. Silas Vance had made his move, targeting the bakery directly, setting fire to the property just hours before. My heart stopped when I heard the news. The bakery, everything my family had worked for, was gone. Vincent's empire was burning, and so was everything I had ever known. As I stood before him that night, I knew that I had reached a point of no return. I could walk away and let my family's business die, or I could stay by Vincent's side, with all the consequences that came with it. "I've already lost everything, Amelia," Vincent said, his voice rough. "But I won't lose you." Tears filled my eyes as I faced him. My decision had been made. I wasn't just staying to protect my family's legacy. I was staying because, despite everything, I loved him. "I choose you, Vincent," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I choose you, even if it costs me everything." And with that, I sealed my fate. The night was heavy with unspoken tension, as if the very air itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. My heart was racing, thudding painfully against my ribs, but I could hardly hear it over the chaos unfolding around me. Vincent's world, the world I had been drawn into, had enveloped me with its dangerous allure and undeniable power, was starting to unravel. I stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling windows in Vincent's mansion, staring out at the sprawling cityscape that now felt like a distant, unreachable place. The lights twinkled below, the once comforting hum of the city now drowned by the overwhelming noise inside. Vincent's empire was crumbling. Silas Vance's attacks had grown bolder, more calculated, and his grip on the city seemed to be tightening with every passing hour. And as the tension escalated, so did the threat to everything I held dear. My bakery, my family's legacy, was on the verge of being destroyed. The phone call had come in just hours earlier, breaking the fragile calm we'd been trying to maintain. My father, sounding more frazzled than I'd ever heard him, had informed me that the bakery was under threat. Vance had infiltrated every aspect of the business. He had already begun to siphon off the suppliers, making sure the ovens were rendered useless. The windows were being shattered with the soft, steady rhythm of his relentless campaign. "Amelia, you need to get out of there," my father had pleaded, the desperation in his voice almost breaking me. "There's no hope left. Vance is too powerful. You have to leave, Vincent, or everything you've worked for will be lost." I had always thought that I could weather any storm. This one, however, felt different. There was too much at stake. The weight of my father's words hung heavily in the air, almost suffocating me. And Vincent, his face, usually so composed, had twisted with frustration. I had never seen him so vulnerable, so desperate. His eyes, dark as the depths of a stormy sea, bore into mine with an intensity that could have scorched me. "You're not leaving me, Amelia," he had said, his voice harsh, final. "You'll never leave me. I won't allow it." The words echoed in my mind as I walked slowly back to the heart of the mansion. I passed the vast hallways, the opulent rooms that had once felt like a sanctuary, and now they felt like a gilded cage, closing in around me. I could feel Vincent's presence behind me, the heavy pull of his gaze, his power saturating the space between us. I wasn't just a part of his world anymore. I had become his world. But I couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't escape the suffocating grip of his control, the constant reminder that I was trapped in his empire. I found him in his study, staring out at the city with the same determined expression he always wore when things got tough. His jaw was clenched, his fingers twitching at his side. The tension radiated from him, his entire body coiled, like a spring ready to snap. He didn't turn when I entered, his eyes still focused on the view outside, but I could feel him, the way his presence consumed the room, demanding attention. "What do you want me to do, Vincent?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's left for me? For us? I don't even know what we're fighting for anymore." For the first time, he turned to me, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. It was a raw, unguarded look, something I had never seen from him before. "I'm fighting for you, Amelia," he said quietly, his voice rough. "For your family, for your bakery. This empire, this city. None of it matters if I lose you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized how impossible it was to reconcile the man I had come to care for with the power-hungry, dangerous kingpin I had fallen into the orbit of. His empire, for all its wealth and prestige, had torn apart everything I once knew. The bakery, my family's legacy, was now caught in the crossfire of a war I never asked for. I couldn't lose my family's business. I couldn't walk away from everything I had worked so hard to protect, no matter how much I loved him. That night, Vincent called a meeting. His most trusted men, the ones who had helped him build his empire, sat around the table in the war room, their faces serious, every detail of their demeanor telling me that things were about to get worse before they could get better. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the air thick with the tension that hung like smoke in the room. Every word, every glance exchanged between them felt like a move in a game I couldn't even begin to understand. Vincent's empire was facing a direct attack from Vance, and there was no way to fight it without paying the price. "The bakery is just the beginning," Vincent said, his voice low and steady. "Vance is trying to cripple everything. The sooner we take him out, the sooner we take control." The idea of getting involved in another violent confrontation was suffocating. My role in all of this was to be a pawn, a symbol of Vincent's power, whether I liked it or not, and I had started to feel the weight of that truth. I couldn't take it anymore. "Vincent, I can't be a part of this," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't be your pawn. I can't keep living in this world you've built." He didn't look surprised, but the look in his eyes, cold, calculating, said it all. I was slipping from his grasp. The more I tried to pull away, the tighter his grip became. The decision came swiftly, the culmination of everything that had been building inside me. I had always wanted to save my bakery. I had always wanted to protect my family's legacy. But the cost of staying in Vincent's world, the cost of being with him, it was too high. "You have to choose, Amelia," Vincent said, his voice low but intense. "I can offer you protection, a future, everything you've ever wanted, but it comes at a price. You'll be bound to me, bound to my world, or you can leave and take the risk of losing everything." His words sliced through me. I could feel the weight of his power in every syllable. "Vincent," I whispered, stepping closer. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." He reached for me, his hand gentle on my cheek. "I'm offering you everything, Amelia. A life with me. No more fear, no more uncertainty. You'll be protected. But the cost, I realized, wasn't just the life he was offering. The cost was my soul, my autonomy, my independence. I would never be free again. I stood in front of him, my heart aching, torn between the love I felt for him and the life I had to reclaim for myself. "Vincent," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't live in your world anymore. I can't be your possession. I need my freedom." His face twisted with frustration, anger flashing in his eyes. But then, he softened, and in that moment, I saw something in him I hadn't expected. Vulnerability. He wasn't just the kingpin, the cold-blooded manipulator. He was a man who had lost, who was terrified of losing me. "I love you, Amelia," he said, his voice strained. "I don't want to lose you." I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched his chest. "I love you too, Vincent. But I have to go." The choice was made. I walked away from everything. The power, the protection, the danger that came with being Vincent's. I returned to my family's bakery, to the life I had once known. But this time, it wasn't about survival. It was about reclaiming the one thing I had nearly lost. Myself. Vincent's empire would crumble without me. And maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild everything I had once dreamed of. The price of freedom was high, but it was a price I was finally willing to pay. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I stood by the window, gazing out at the city that had once held so many promises, so many dreams. The skyline shimmered in the early light, but it didn't seem as intimidating now, no longer an unscalable mountain I could never hope to climb. The world, which had once seemed so uncertain, now felt full of possibility. I had made my decision. I had walked away from Vincent. I had walked away from everything he represented, his empire, his power, his control. The life I once dreamed of, the life I thought I was destined for, was no longer enough. I was no longer defined by him or by the dark world he had pulled me into. I was Amelia, just Amelia. The bakery had always been more than just a business to me. It was my family's legacy, my inheritance, and my heart. Every loaf of bread, every perfect cupcake, and every sweet treat I made was a piece of my soul woven into the fabric of that place. It was where I had grown up, where I had learned the art of baking from my mother, and where I had found solace in the rhythm of dough being kneaded, in the soft crackle of bread as it came out of the oven. But in Vincent's world, I had almost lost it all. In the weeks since I left, I'd poured myself back into my craft, rediscovered the joy of creating, of baking not for anyone else but for myself. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over my life again. I wasn't a pawn in anyone's game, nor a symbol of power. I was simply a woman who had reclaimed her passion, her dreams, and her future. The bakery was thriving once more. My team, the one I had worked tirelessly to build, had come together with renewed enthusiasm. The aroma of freshly baked goods filled the air every day, and the customers, old and new, could sense the difference. I was back where I belonged, and this time, I wasn't leaving. I knew Vincent would never let me go without a fight. I had always known that. His world was not one that allowed for loose ends. There was no room for weakness, for vulnerability. When he had asked me to stay, to be his, I had almost believed it. Believed that being with him was the only way to protect the things I cared about. But I had been wrong. Love, I had realized, was not about submission. It wasn't about being someone's possession, a trophy on their arm. Love was about respect, about being seen for who you truly were, and being allowed to stand on your own 2 feet. It was about having a partner, not a controller. I hadn't just walked away from Vincent. I had walked away from everything that held me back, everything that threatened to keep me from finding peace. I had found my freedom, my strength, and my voice. And with it came a clarity I had never known. The bakery was buzzing with activity when I walked in that morning, the usual chorus of laughter and chatter filling the air. My team greeted me with smiles, their faces radiating the same warmth that had made this place a home for me. The scent of freshly baked pastries swirled around me, and for a moment, I let myself bask in it. This was my world now, and no one could take it from me. I smiled as I moved behind the counter, ready to begin another day. But then, as I passed the front door, I saw him. Vincent. He was standing just outside the bakery, his silhouette framed by the sunlight streaming through the glass doors. He was no longer the man who had consumed my every thought, no longer the powerful figure who had controlled my every move. Now, he was just a man, someone I had loved, someone who had once held my heart in his hands, but someone I had left behind. He looked different. The coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable, something I couldn't quite place. His usual stoic expression had softened, and I could see the faintest hint of regret in his features. For a moment, I hesitated. The pull between us was still there, undeniable, like a thread woven through my heart. I had once believed that we were meant to be together, that our fates were tied. But that was before I had learned that love could exist outside the confines of power and control. Before I realized that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's expectations, I stood at the counter, watching him for a long moment as the weight of my choice settled over me. I had made it, and I wasn't going back. As if sensing my decision, Vincent pushed open the door, stepping into the bakery. The bell above the door jingled softly, announcing his arrival, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. The air grew thick with anticipation. Everyone fell silent, as though they too understood the gravity of the situation. Vincent walked toward me, his steps measured, his gaze never leaving mine. He didn't look as imposing as he once had. He was no longer the man who commanded fear, the one who could silence an entire room with a glance. Now, he was just Vincent, a man who had made his choice, and was now coming to terms with the consequences. When he reached the counter, he stopped and stood there for a moment, just looking at me. His presence filled the space, but there was no longer the same sense of dominance. It was almost as if he was waiting for permission. "Amelia," he said, his voice quiet, almost tender. "I wanted to see you one last time, to apologize for everything." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the remnants of a past I had left behind. "There's nothing to apologize for, Vincent. You made your choices, and I made mine. I had to choose myself this time." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I understand," he said, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite decipher. "I always knew you were strong. I didn't want to admit it, but I see now that you were right. You were never mine to control, Amelia." His words hit me harder than I expected, the weight of them pressing down on my chest. I had always seen Vincent as the man in control, the one who shaped the world around him with his ruthless ambition. But now, he was admitting his own flaws, his own limitations. He was giving me the one thing I had always wanted: freedom. "I thought I needed to protect you," he continued, his voice softer now. "But I see now that you don't need me. You've always been strong, Amelia. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for." I swallowed hard, my emotions swirling. It wasn't easy to hear him speak so openly, so vulnerably, but I had to remind myself that this was the end of a chapter, not the beginning of a new one. I had made my choice. "I have a future, Vincent," I said, my voice steady. "And it's one I'm building on my own terms." He stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he might reach out for me. But then he stopped, his hands falling to his sides. "I'll never forget you, Amelia. You taught me what it means to love someone without control." Vincent turned and walked out of the bakery, leaving me standing there with a heart full of emotions I didn't know how to process. But as the door closed behind him, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This was it, the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. I watched him leave, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of his presence lingering. Instead, I felt free. Free to pursue my dreams. Free to take back my life. Later that evening, as I closed up the bakery, I stood at the counter, looking at the rows of fresh pastries. The lights dimmed, the bustle of the day finally settling into a quiet calm, and as I stood there, I realized just how far I had come. I was no longer bound by the past. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Vincent or the empire he had built. I had reclaimed my life. And in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The end of one chapter was just the beginning of another. And this time, the path was mine to choose.